Welcome everyone to part 2 of the typewriter rebuild and upgrades. So I'm just doing the pre-assemblies here, and I had a bit of trouble installing this water block. Usually EK water blocks are requested, so I haven't installed these that much. But the hold down plate was really badly misaligned, and I had difficulty aligning it. I thought you could just undo the bolts and it would release the hold down plate. It's in two pieces pushed into either side of the CPU water block, but it wouldn't release even after undoing the bolts, so I actually had to hit it with a mallet to align them. I'm not sure if other people have had this issue. So this case, most of you will probably know if you've seen the original typewriter build log, but it's a heavily modified Caselabs S3. And due to the mods, the component order is even more specific. So I ended up redoing things a few times because I installed the wrong components first, which then blocks other components. And even the cables, you can't even get the cables in. Also because we installed a larger power supply, and that's why I had to change one of the mods just where the DDC pump is installed. I ended up flipping it over because originally it was laying flat. So I've now put it up vertically, which just meant drilling another couple of holes into the bottom panel, and this gave us more room for a bigger power supply. I tried to install the AX1600, but it didn't fit by about 5mm. It was hitting the filter. So I ended up going with the ROG Thor 1200. As you can see, I haven't polished the brass. I was very tempted to, but the customer really wanted it to be, kind of corroded and start looking like the case, because this custom paint job and the whole theme is like kind of heated or burned metal. It's the colors that you get in when you heat like stainless steel and titanium. You get purples and greens and things like that. So it's all about metal, and the case is also supposed to look like copper, and that's the reason for the violet and green cables as well. So I used two different sizes of tube in the original build, and I thought about changing this all to 16mm, but it doesn't make much of a difference when it's just short lengths like this, because there's a lot of restriction that's a lot worse than 12mm tube anyway. And there ended up being two sections that I didn't replace, and it's just because you can see the top tube there, the 90-degree tube. It would have required a larger hole in the top panel, but there was not enough room to make a larger hole because there's hardly any space between the fan on the top panel and the hard drives and the water blocks. So yeah, I ended up just leaving two lengths of the 12mm tube. So this was a problem that I knew was going to happen with the 6900 XT. This is the Asus Tough version, which is wider than standard, and so I ended up doing a little mod to solve this problem so that this GPU could fit into the build nicely. The problem was I was very worried that this wasn't actually going to work, but of course we could have used a thinner top radiator. It's just that radiator capacity is already starting to get low in this build. I mean, being an ITX build, we're cramming all of these high-end parts in, the 6900 XT, the 5950X. So I also, the customer wanted to keep the original design and the components, the loop layout, the mods, not completely, gut everything and change everything. But you can see there was just enough room for this little mod that I had in mind. So this fitting on the 240mm radiator coming out of the side, it's a very tight fit. I'm probably going to have to change this to 90-degree. So you can see all that I've done is drilled a couple of holes into the water block, and it just so happens that this water block, and I think a lot of the EK water blocks, have just a deeper depth machine section which is just large enough to drill G1/4 inch holes into. And what this means is that where you're drilling the holes, there's a nice deep section in the acrylic part of the water block which allows plenty of flow. Actually, this mod will allow more flow into and out of the water block than the stock 90-degree piece that we are removing. And then I've just laser cut a piece of 6mm acrylic and a gasket, and this gasket material is actually the exact same material that we use for our distribution plates, Spectre for example. It's just black silicon, and yeah, just bolted that on using actually these are different bolts because we need a different length, and now we have a perfect fit. It's about 2mm from touching the radiator. Now, the only flaw with this is that I need to use quite a few 90-degree fittings to get across to the CPU, because I'm going from the CPU into the GPU. And this loop layout for this build is obviously very specific and can't really be changed because of all of the mods. And even if I was going to change this, even if the customer didn't want to stick to the original design, this is really the optimal loop layout still with these new components. And I just can't change it. It's the hard drive water blocks on the top panel that complicates things quite a bit and makes a lot of this loop really difficult and tight. And I know it's strange to have hard drive water blocks and also even to have hard drives these days. And these are 150 gig Western Digital Velocity Raptors, 10,000 RPM. So very strange, but it is part of the theme, a very important part. It's why the build is called Typewriter. The customer wanted to have these very loud drives on the top so that you can hear them clicking away. They sound like a typewriter, and these were certainly very loud drives. So I think I've said many times now that I would not build another loop without using a pressure tester. I highly recommend them, even just for dumb mistakes like leaving a port open somewhere, which on really complex loops is not difficult to do. Obviously you need to triple check everything before you start filling the loop, but just for that peace of mind. And I don't get many leaks, but I'd say maybe 1 in 10 builds it really saves me, so it's totally worth doing. And I had a good leak with this build, and it was actually a really fast leak. It was coming from the CPU water block, and I had to over tighten it a lot to get it to seal. So I'm very glad I picked up that one, because that would be the absolute worst place to get a leak, right on top of the motherboard and the CPU socket.